So how significant was this year's summit? Let's bring in Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and now CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Now, I'm sure you were following this week's NATO summit very closely. Was the gathering, in your mind, a success?
Yes, I think it's very difficult to call it anything other but a success. A number of things are very important. For the Ukrainian audience, it was important that NATO reaffirmed not only its commitment to help Ukraine in every possible way to defend itself against this brutal invasion that the Russians launched now more than 500 days ago, but also to not only open the door, but say that it's time for Ukraine to think about stepping through that door of membership. It said that the future of Ukraine is in NATO. President Biden said that Ukraine will join NATO. The question is not a matter anymore of whether, but of when. But it was also significant because it sent a real important signal to Russia. NATO is stronger. It's more united. It is larger. All as a result of what Vladimir Putin did when he decided to launch this invasion. We have Finland, of course, already as a member, Sweden soon to be a member, and the 33rd member, Ukraine, knocking on the door. All in all,
you mentioned that door. I just want to ask you, in terms of a message to Russia, the door has been left open, but there was no timeline provided for Ukraine to actually walk through it. Was that a strong enough message to Russia, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's very important in many ways to think about not having a timeline. If you were to link Ukrainian membership to, for example, an end of hostilities or the end of the war, you were going to give Russia every excuse to continue fighting for as long as it takes. That wasn't done. So I think the timeline, as President Biden said, is months, not years. We will have to see how the counteroffensive that Ukraine is now engaging in will evolve. But the idea is that by the end of the year, we hope to be in a position in which we have a very serious set of discussions with the Ukraine about how this war may either end or at least how negotiation may be started. And NATO membership is a fundamental part of that. It is, after all, the prospect of NATO membership that the Russia fears the Ukrainians want. It gives us leverage over how these negotiations will go about. If I were Vladimir Putin, I would not be happy about what happened in Vilnius this week.
A couple of new members, of course, Finland being the newest member of the bloc, and now Sweden having its membership cleared. What's the significance of this expansion into those Nordic countries for NATO?
It's very significant in two ways. The Baltic Sea is becoming a NATO lake. It bottles up the Baltic Sea fleet in St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad that the Russians have. It's very difficult for the Russians to now think about using the Baltic as part of the military domain that it can control, let alone dominate. And then in the Arctic, way up north, there are 8 Arctic nations. 7 of those will, with Sweden joining, be NATO members, and only Russia being the non-NATO member. So that's important. And then finally, of course, with Finland having joined NATO, more than half, it has doubled the border region between NATO and Russia that existed before the war. That is significant because, remember, this war was started by Vladimir Putin, ostensibly because he thought NATO was coming too close to its borders. Well, as a result of his actions, of the brutality of the Russian forces, Finland is now closer, is in NATO, and NATO has come closer to Russia than ever before.
Just want to zoom back out now to 2008, and that's also Ukraine back then was asking for membership to NATO. It didn't get a clear timeline, didn't get a clear timeline now either. Do you think it was a missed opportunity many years ago to not provide that timeline for Ukraine? And could that have potentially prevented a larger conflict?
Yeah, I think, Lynn, looking back, it's pretty clear that if Ukraine had been a member of NATO, what happened on the 24th of February 2022 would not have happened. After all, Russia has not attacked NATO. It has attacked the country that was explicitly excluded from NATO. So I think the lesson, certainly the Finns and the Swedes learned that. The Ukrainians already knew that, but they are learning it now with incredible courage and shedding blood on the battlefield, is that safety is being part of NATO, which is why it is so important that, in contrast of 2008, when there was no consensus on the question of Ukraine joining NATO, now after Vilnius, there isn't a single country that doesn't believe that the future of Ukraine is in NATO. That's an important change, and it is something that not only Ukraine can take to the bank, but frankly, Vladimir Putin has to be worried about.
Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure.